first thing I noticed was that the lock didn't move. I stood there on my front porch, snow piling up around my boots, twisting the key harder than I probably should have, but it refused to turn. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I was just tired and doing something wrong. I tried again, slower this time. Same result. The deadbolt was completely frozen. That was the moment when I realized I might not be getting inside my house that night. I had moved to northern Montana a little over 4 years earlier. It wasn't a spontaneous decision. I'd been planning it for a long time, mostly because I wanted space. Real space. I was in my mid-20s, single, working a job that didn't require me to be anywhere specific, and I was exhausted by people. Montana felt like the opposite of everything I wanted to escape. Wide land, long winters, silence. The rental I found sat off a narrow county road near a place called White Creek. The nearest town was almost 25 minutes away, and the closest neighbor was far enough that you couldn't see their house unless you walked halfway down the road. For me, that was perfect. The first few years were exactly what I hoped for. Nothing happened. That's not sarcasm. My days were repetitive in a comforting way. I worked, cooked, slept, and occasionally drove into town for groceries. Winters were rough, but I was prepared for that. Or at least I thought I was. That night in February, the storm wasn't supposed to be anything special. I was at work when the snow started, light at first. By early afternoon, the wind picked up. By the time my manager sent everyone home, it was coming down sideways. Visibility was garbage, but I drove a four-wheel drive truck and had dealt with worse. Still, the drive home took longer than usual. Drifts were already forming, and there were stretches of road where I couldn't see the edges. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter than I normally would, telling myself I'd be fine once I got home. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the relief was immediate. My truck cut through the snow like a champ, but it was clear the storm wasn't slowing down. I grabbed my bag, shut the door, and walked up to the porch. That's when the key refused to turn. I tried everything, breathing on it, rubbing it with my gloves, jiggling it, swearing at it. Nothing worked. I didn't have anything in my truck that could heat the lock without risking damage, and the snow was coming down harder by the minute. I sat in my truck with the heater blasting, staring at the house through the windshield. At first, I told myself I'd just wait it out. Maybe the storm would die down. Maybe I could call a locksmith in the morning. But after 10 minutes, I realized how bad the situation actually was. My truck was already getting buried. Snow was creeping up the sides of the tires. If it kept going like this, I wasn't going anywhere. And sitting there all night wasn't an option. Running the engine non-stop in a blizzard wasn't smart, and if the truck died, I'd be stuck in a metal freezer. That's when I accepted something I really didn't want to accept. I needed help. The nearest house was about a third of a mile down the road. I'd driven past it hundreds of times, but had never met the person who lived there. I didn't even know their name. I bundled up, locked my truck, and started walking. By the time I reached the house, my hands were numb and my face burned from the cold. The place was small, old, and poorly maintained. One story, sagging porch, single light glowing inside. I knocked as hard as I could. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Just as I was about to turn away, the door flew open so suddenly it startled me. The man standing there looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s. Average height, average build. Nothing memorable about his face at all, which somehow made him more unsettling. He stared at me for a long second before speaking. "Name's Carl," he said. I introduced myself and explained what happened. He listened without interrupting, nodding slowly, eyes fixed on me, but not really seeing me. When I finished, he stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. The warmth hit me immediately. I thanked him probably too many times and followed him inside. The house smelled old, like dust and something faintly sour. The furniture looked like it hadn't been replaced in decades. Carl offered me the couch and sat down in an armchair across from me. We made small talk, or at least I tried to. He answered questions, but his focus drifted constantly. His eyes kept flicking to the ceiling, then the hallway, then back to me. Sometimes he'd start talking and just stop, mid-sentence. Like he forgot what he was saying. I told myself he was just awkward, maybe not used to company. Still, I couldn't relax. Eventually, I said I was exhausted and asked if I could sleep. He seemed relieved by that. He told me I could take the couch and turned off the lamp. But instead of leaving, he stood in the doorway, just watching me. I pretended to fall asleep. After what felt like forever, he finally walked down the hallway. That's when the noises started. At first, it was faint, a dull thump above me, followed by a scraping sound. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was the snow shifting on the roof. But the house didn't have an upper floor. The sounds continued. Irregular. Heavy, like something being dragged. Then came a loud bang that shook the ceiling. I sat up, heart pounding, and that's when I saw him. Carl was standing in the doorway again, completely still. I hadn't heard him approach. I opened my mouth to ask what was going on, but before I could say a word, he rushed me. He came over the back of the couch and slammed me to the floor. The impact knocked the wind out of me. He wrapped his arm around my neck, trying to choke me, muttering something over and over. She's been alone too long. I fought like my life depended on it, because it did. I managed to elbow him hard enough to loosen his grip and shoved him away. I scrambled up, grabbed my coat, and bolted for the door. Behind me, he screamed, "She won't like this." I didn't stop running until I reached the next house. The couple there pulled me inside immediately. I slept on their couch that night. The next morning, I told them everything. The husband went quiet when I described the house. "That's Carl," he said. He told me Carl's wife had disappeared years ago. No body, no investigation. Everyone just avoided him. I reported everything to the police. Nothing came of it. I still live near White Creek. I still pass that house. And every winter when the snow piles up on the roof, I think about the sounds I heard above me and what he meant when he said she was lonely. Like, subscribe, and comment if this story creeped you out. More night shift horror coming soon. The knocking didn't sound urgent at first. That was what bothered me the most about it later. It wasn't frantic or desperate or loud. It was slow, measured. 3 steady knocks, evenly spaced, like whoever was standing on my porch wasn't worried about the cold or the storm or the fact that it was almost 11 at night. I remember sitting on my couch, staring at the front door, waiting for the next knock to come. When it didn't, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. I was living alone at the time in a small rental house in northern Wisconsin, just outside a town most people would drive through without noticing. I worked remotely in accounting, which meant I rarely had a reason to leave the house during the week. Winter made that isolation even worse, but I didn't mind it. I liked quiet. I liked routine. I liked knowing that nothing unexpected was going to happen. The local news had been warning about the blizzard for days. They always do, but this time, it actually delivered. By late afternoon, snow was already piling up on the roads, and the wind had that hollow sound that rattles windows and makes houses feel thinner than they are. I'd gone grocery shopping that morning and stocked up enough to last a few days. By the time night rolled around, I was wrapped in a blanket on the couch, half watching TV, half listening to the storm. The wind didn't come in gusts. It was constant, like standing next to a highway that never quieted down. Around 10:30, I heard a dull thud from outside, followed by a scraping noise. My first thought was a tree branch. There were a few old trees lining the road near my driveway, and heavy snow tends to bring them down. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing else happened, so I turned the volume back up. About 15 minutes later, I heard a car horn. It wasn't a normal honk. It was weak, short, like someone had accidentally leaned on it. I stood up and went to the front window. Visibility was terrible. The snow was blowing sideways, illuminated only by my porch light. But I could see headlights near the end of my driveway, barely cutting through the white. The car wasn't moving. I stood there for a while, trying to see if anyone got out. I didn't see a door open or a silhouette move. The storm made everything blurry and indistinct. Eventually, I told myself the driver would call for help or turn around once conditions improved. I went back to the couch. That's when I heard the knocking again. 3 slow knocks, louder this time. I didn't open the door. Instead, I walked up to it and called out, asking who was there. A man's voice answered. He said his car was stuck and he needed to warm up and use a phone. His voice sounded strained, like he was out of breath. I hesitated. I felt guilty about that hesitation too. Anyone walking through a blizzard like this would be freezing. but something about the situation didn't sit right with me. I cracked the door open just enough to keep the security chain latched. The man on my porch was covered in snow. It clung to his jacket, his hair, his shoulders. He was shorter than me and visibly shivering. He said again that his phone had died and he'd been walking for a while trying to find help. I was about to unlock the chain when I looked down. His boots were clean. Not just relatively clean. Completely clean. Dry. No snow packed into the treads. No slush. No ice. If he'd really walked even a few minutes in that storm, they should have been soaked. My stomach dropped. I told him I'd call for help and have someone come get him. His expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed it. He asked to be let in again, this time more firmly. I didn't respond. I closed the door and locked it. As I walked toward the kitchen to grab my phone, I heard him say something on the other side of the door. I couldn't make out the words. I dialed 911 and explained the situation, lowering my voice without really knowing why. While I was on the phone, I heard footsteps move from my porch toward the side of my house. The operator told me to stay inside and lock all doors. She said officers were on the way, but warned that response times might be slow due to the storm. I moved to a side window and peeked out. The man was standing near the corner of my house, maybe 15 feet away. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, looking up at the windows. A few minutes later, the banging started at my back door. It wasn't knocking. It was forceful, repetitive impacts. The door rattled in its frame. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and backed into my bedroom, locking the door behind me. The banging stopped suddenly. I stood there in silence, listening so hard my ears hurt. I don't know how long passed. 10 minutes, 20. Time felt warped. Then I heard the car horn again. This time, it was one long, continuous blast. The police arrived not long after that. 2 officers knocked and announced themselves. I let them in, hands shaking. They checked the perimeter while I explained everything. They found a vehicle partially buried in a snowbank down the road. The engine was cold. According to them, it hadn't been driven recently. What really unsettled me was what they told me next. There were no footprints leading from the vehicle to my house. The snow between the car and my driveway was untouched. There were footprints around my house, though, leading down the driveway, around the side, and stopping abruptly near the road. The officers searched the area but didn't find anyone. The next morning, after the storm passed, I went outside to look around. That's when I saw the muddy handprints on my bedroom window. They hadn't been there the night before. I was sure of it. A few days later, I learned that another house about half a mile away had been broken into during the storm. Nothing was stolen, no valuables missing, just signs of forced entry. I moved out of that house 6 months later. I still don't open my door for anyone I'm not expecting, especially not in the middle of a storm. I've gone back and forth for years on whether what I experienced was real. Some days, I can convince myself it was nothing more than shock, pain, and hypothermia mixing together in my head. Other days, usually when the weather turns bad or the snow starts falling heavier than expected, that explanation feels weak, like something I tell myself because the alternative is harder to live with. I'm 35 now and live in western Colorado. In my 20s, skiing wasn't just a hobby for me, it was my entire life. I raced competitively for most of my teens and early 20s, mostly alpine. I wasn't Olympic level or anything like that, but I competed nationally for several years. Eventually, the injuries started piling up. Knees, back, shoulders, nothing catastrophic, just enough to remind me that my body wasn't indestructible. I stepped away from competitive racing at 27. That didn't mean I stopped skiing. If anything, it gave me the freedom to ski the way I actually loved. Backcountry terrain. No lifts, no crowds, just long climbs, quiet descents, and the kind of silence you don't get anywhere else. I want to make something very clear before going any further. I wasn't reckless. I was avalanche trained. I carried proper gear, beacon, shovel, probe. I checked forecasts obsessively. I followed protocols. I told someone where I was going and when I planned to be back. I'd done dozens of solo trips without incident. That's why what happened still bothers me so much. The plan that day was simple. A day trip into a familiar range about 2 hours north of where I lived. I'd skied there multiple times before. The forecast called for light snowfall, a few inches at most. Winds were supposed to be mild. Avalanche risk was listed as moderate, but manageable if you stuck to conservative lines. I checked everything twice the night before, then again that morning. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sky was already heavier than I expected. Thick, low clouds, snow flurries drifting sideways. I hesitated for a moment, standing next to my car, weighing whether to turn around. I didn't. I told myself I'd reassess once I gained some elevation. The climb up went smoothly at first. The snow picked up gradually, but nothing alarming. The wind was stronger than forecasted, though, and coming from a direction I didn't expect. Visibility was slowly degrading, the mountains losing definition around the edges. By the time I reached the top of the line I wanted to ski, conditions were borderline. The smart move would have been to turn around. Instead, I told myself I'd take one careful run and call it a day. About 2/3 of the way down, the slope shifted. If you've never triggered an avalanche, it's hard to describe how fast it happens. There's no buildup, no warning siren. 1 second the snow is solid, the next it isn't. The surface fractures, and suddenly you're moving whether you want to or not. I got lucky. It wasn't a massive slide, maybe a class 2, enough to knock me off my skis and carry me downslope, but not enough to bury me completely. I tumbled for what felt like forever before slamming into something solid. The pain in my left leg was immediate and overwhelming. I lay there for a moment, gasping, trying to get my bearings. My skis had released, which was good, but one of them was nowhere in sight. When I tried to stand, my leg gave out instantly. I sat back down in the snow and took stock of my situation. Storm worsening, visibility getting worse by the minute, one ski missing, leg injured badly enough that I couldn't put weight on it. Cell service non-existent. I had 3 options, and all of them were bad. I could stay put and hope someone came looking for me, but only one person knew my route, and they wouldn't panic for hours. I could try to dig in and wait out the storm, but I didn't have overnight supplies and the temperature was dropping fast. Or I could start moving, slowly, painfully, and try to cover ground before conditions deteriorated completely. I chose to move. I secured what gear I could and used my remaining ski pole as a makeshift crutch. Every step sent white-hot pain through my leg, but stopping wasn't an option. The snow was coming down harder now, thick flakes erasing my tracks almost as soon as I made them. I was focused entirely on not passing out when I heard something behind me. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me. Then I heard it again, the distinct sound of skis cutting through snow. I turned around. Someone was coming down the slope toward me. Seeing another person out there filled me with a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief because I wasn't alone. Fear because I had no idea how anyone else could be out there in conditions like this. He reached me within a few minutes. He was backcountry equipped, same as me. Helmet, goggles, pack. He stopped and pulled his goggles up slightly, asking if I was hurt. His voice was calm, too calm. I told him what happened. Without hesitation, he moved to my side and let me put my arm over his shoulder. We started moving together slowly. I leaned on him heavily, surprised by how steady he felt. Something about the situation felt off, but I couldn't place why. Maybe it was just the adrenaline wearing off. Maybe it was shock. We talked as we moved, basic stuff, where we were headed, how bad the storm was getting. At one point, he said something that stuck with me. He said he hadn't used his legs in a long time, and it felt good to be back on solid ground. I laughed, assuming he was joking or speaking metaphorically. He didn't laugh back. We kept moving. Eventually, I had to stop. The pain in my leg was unbearable. I leaned against a tree and closed my eyes for what couldn't have been more than a few seconds. When I opened them, he was gone. I panicked immediately, calling out to him. There was no response. I looked around, expecting to see him a few yards away, but there was no one there. And there were no tracks, no ski tracks, no footprints, nothing but my own uneven trail in the snow. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to rationalize it. Maybe he moved faster than I thought. Maybe the snow filled in his tracks quickly. Maybe I imagined him entirely, but I remembered the weight of his shoulder under my arm. I don't know how I made it back to my car. The rest of the journey is a blur of pain, cold, and stubbornness. Somehow, I did it. I drove myself to the hospital and was told my leg was badly sprained but not broken. The doctor told me I was incredibly lucky. A few days later, while recovering at home, I was scrolling through a local outdoor forum when I saw a post about a missing backcountry skier. He'd gone out alone during a storm weeks earlier. Same mountain range, no body found. There were no photos attached. I still ski. I just don't go alone anymore because I still don't know who helped me off that mountain. Comment below if you've ever worked a night shift like this. Subscribe for more true feeling horror stories that stay with you long after the video ends.